MEC Copta, MEC Treasury, they've all had the opportunity to hear the story for their own provinces. And then the consolidated picture has been shared with the national leadership, specifically the Minister of Copta, the Minister of Finance, the Minister in the Presidency, as well as the Cabinet. So that by the time we share the reports that, as we have done now, we've upheld the tradition that has stood this office in really good stead, which is that we will talk to our stakeholders before we talk about the work we've done in their environment. The general report that went out last week was accompanied by a website application, which was really about giving access to our information in a much more drilled down type fashion so that people could see outcomes of particular municipalities, of districts, of provinces. In the meantime, we've had a bit of a glitch in terms of the accessibility of that functionality. We are dealing with it, and that would be then relaunched so that citizens can access information on their particular municipalities. I want to highlight that the integrity of our general report has not been compromised. The credible insights that you are used to getting from this office remain such. The independent audit process remains intact. And as such, the information I'm able to share with you hasn't changed from last week. I'll just highlight a few things, but just and give some opportunity for us to dialogue, because that's the part I'm really looking forward to. On our next slide, we highlight that our reputation promise as an audit office has remained what it has been for a very long time now. I've been in the office now for a period of 10 years, and we've always said that we want to audit and report in a manner that adds value into the systems of transparency, accountability, and good governance. Whilst we don't run institutions of government, we see ourselves as an integral part of the accountability ecosystem, and that each of those players in that ecosystem has different roles. But if we play our roles in a way that's complementary and consistently so, we will be able to change how people engage with their work, and we will be able to strengthen the institutions that are there to serve the public. Much of our reporting this time around, you'll see, is focused not just on the role of leaders in the municipal space, but we've dealt with the role of leaders at provincial level, in both the executive and in the legislatures. We've also looked at the national level, looking specifically at the role that the National Copta and the National Treasury ought to play, as well as their own respective committees in Parliament, so that if we get every single one of the players within this ecosystem operating in a way that's consistent with their duties given in the Constitution, specified in the Municipal Finance Management Act, and detailed in the Municipal Systems Act, if we can get all of those players acting on their responsibilities, we really can start to drive a different tone within government. We can shift the culture within government, and indeed we can start to strengthen municipalities as public institutions. So whilst we talk about the officials, the municipal manager, the senior managers, the audit committees, and the internal auditors within municipalities, we also focus on the role that the Speaker of Council, the Mayor, should be playing, the mayoral committee should be playing, the MPAC should be playing at council level. And then we expand our reach into the provincial space so that we can give insights, and hopefully the type of insights that change behavior and change the choices that different players in the ecosystem make. The outcomes, I think you're very well acquainted with. I'll highlight that if you look at all three areas that we cover when we audit, financial information, performance information, and compliance, and then you also look at the statement we make in our audit reports around the status of internal controls, and you look at our reports on the material irregularities that arise from the new powers we have. If you look at all of those together, you do get a feel for the status of every institution that we've audited, especially insofar as the strength of their systems of transparency, of accountability, of performance, and of integrity in that they do that which they are called to do. And we've also highlighted once again that yes, whilst a clean audit doesn't confirm that services have been delivered or that performance has been at the desired level, a clean audit is an important confirmation that that institution has put in place the key disciplines for good financial management, good performance management, and that it is well positioned to deliver on its mandate and to do so transparently. What we can do then is look at the information in those certified accounts, information in that confirmed performance report, to then assess why service delivery might not be at the level that we would like, or even in all of the areas of a community that we would like to see. The big story around the local government outcomes this time around was that there's been no improvement if you look at the 5-year journey. Yes, it's helpful to look at the 41 clean audits and want to celebrate that you've got more clean audits than the last year. But if you look at the 5-year journey, we really are not making much of an impact. And if you assess the fact that within the 41 clean audits, most of them are district municipalities, and most of them are located in one province, being the Western Cape. The other provinces are not making significant headway in shifting towards more clean audits. We've made the point about the late submissions and the non-submissions of financials for audit. And one might wonder why we trouble our audiences with this. It's really because the ability to deliver financials for audit at the legislated deadline gives an indication of the commitment of that institution and its leaders to accountability and transparency. And so when we see that there is now slippage in this discipline, where we seem to be going backwards in terms of timeliness of submissions, and then sometimes some municipalities don't even bother to submit, and yet life kind of goes on. That tells you that we are backtracking in terms of the journey towards transparency and accountability. So then we've got those 9 audits that were not completed on time. There's also an interesting story here. Only 82% of the municipalities submitted their financials on time. The rest submitted late. We were able to catch up with those audits such that we could only get to 9 that were left undone at the end of when we closed the books. 10% of municipalities are disclaimer, which is the worst outcome. And then if you look across the spectrum in terms of the different colors and you go back towards the left-hand part of the slide, you'll see that you've got 100 that have got unqualified financials, in that the financials are ticked as credible. The 100 and the 141, you may have heard us say that tells you that just over half of the municipalities are able to publish credible financial statements. When we dug a bit deeper, we were able to tell the story that actually that shouldn't impress us, because the number that gave us quality financial statements when we began the audit process, that was only 62. So only 25% of municipalities have got credible financial management practices that deliver quality financials for us to audit. So the story is not so much about the audit process, but to give you some sense of the disciplines that are being managed during the year. And quite clearly, at 75% of municipalities, they're not in place. And at this point of the journey in driving the strength of local government institutions, we should be concerned. The provincial outcomes, we've given a story about each one of the provinces, but I think the high-level story is that most of them have gone backwards. In the Eastern Cape, whilst they've got an additional 2 clean audits, so that they have now 4 clean audits, they still have both of their metros qualified. They still have 4 disclaimers in the province, 3 of them being repeat disclaimers. And if you look at their 5-year journey, they've actually gone backwards. And the Free State, we spent a lot of time talking about this last week around the Free State outcomes. They don't have a clean audit, much like the Northwest. Only 10 out of the 25 municipalities submitted their financials on time. The rest were either late or they never did submit. What we've done is, using our new powers, is that we've issued material irregularities notifications to those municipalities that don't submit financials on time. And the reason we've done that is that we want to highlight to municipal managers that they are flouting their duty in law to give us financials. And in fact, they are weakening that institution because they are not investing in accountability, in transparency. And in fact, it is having a detrimental impact on the state of controls within that municipality. Specifically, Kopano, Masilonyana, Tukuluho, Muketwana, and Malutia Pofum, we've given those material irregularities notifications. Our experience is that once we've given material irregularity notifications, most of the accounting officers actually do respond. So they start to then take whatever we've raised more seriously than they would have otherwise. So some of them actually do take the action that they should have done in the first place. So at least that's a good outcome in terms of what it is we were able to achieve with our new powers. Gauteng, the 2 clean audits being Midvaal and the city of Ekurhuleni being the only metro with a clean audit. Majority of the municipalities in Gauteng are unqualified. KZN also gone backwards over the 5 years. Limpopo is the only province that's improved over the 5 years, and that's really credit to the tone that was set at the provincial leadership level, as well as the coordination between the provincial treasury and the provincial.
The ANC said they're not going to support, and definitely I did that. I did not support.
In the same month, former Transport Minister Tipuo Peters denied any role.
Okay. There we go. I've met our colleagues at the SABC. Apologies, AG, please continue.
No problem. Thank you. And then what we've highlighted in Limpopo, though, is that the improvements have been consultant driven. So they've relied on the very expensive use of consultants, but of course it makes the gains unsustainable, especially if they don't now focus on building capacity within the municipalities. Mpumalanga also gone backwards over the 5 years. And the point we've made there is that they simply have not heeded the calls we've made over the last 5 years. In the Northern Cape, we found a number of late submissions. Many of those have subsequently been dealt with, so we've been able to complete the audit subsequent to the finalization of our general report. In the Northwest, another area where there have been no clean audits, Northwest tends to have very poor management practices in their municipalities, poor financial management practices, very weak management on performance, and therefore you can see the impact on service delivery. On the compliance front, most of the expenditure tends to be irregular. What we found is that if you look at 2 things, the amount of irregular expenditure as a component of the type of expenditure that they should be spending, we're seeing that 43% of what they spend is non-compliant. And then we're also finding that they never really deal with accumulated irregular expenditure, because the law says once there's been irregular expenditure identified and reported on, the accounting officer must act. And part of acting is to investigate what happened. If they can't investigate it themselves, they can refer it to somebody else to investigate. When that investigation comes back and they are clear on what needs to be done, they must then take the necessary action, either cancel an irregular contract, discipline staff, train staff, report matters to law enforcement, recover funds that have been lost. And that's the role of the accounting officer. In every instance where there's been irregular expenditure, they're supposed to act after we've identified it. The fact that in most of the instances, not just in the Northwest, but in most instances, we find irregular expenditure goes undealt with. That's what builds a culture of tolerating transgressions, and where people who are charged with specific duties and given particular authority in institutions believe that they can get away with wrongdoing because they've seen it happen over and over again. So we've got to start getting accounting officers to do what they're supposed to do in law, which is to investigate matters and deal with them decisively, so that we push back on the culture of tolerating poor performance and transgressions. The Western Cape has got the highest number of clean audits, 22 clean audits. They've got 5 unqualified with findings and 3 that are qualified. The 5 and the 3, so the more undesirable audit outcomes, they are located in 2 districts, specifically Central Karoo and the Garden Route. What we did in the Western Cape, because they've had this record of having a high number of clean audits over many years, we started to deepen the work we do in their clean audits, to start giving them credible insight on how they can improve their service delivery track record, how they can proactively deal with the gap between what they might promise to citizens and what's ultimately delivered, especially insofar as the services on water and sanitation in the informal settlements. So we've given those insights in a way that equips not just the municipality to take different action, but also the provincial COCTA, the provincial treasury, and the premier to start monitoring the decisions that are being made at council level very differently. Disclaimers, we made the point last year that disclaimers are completely intolerable, and we've been concerned that too often disclaimers are seen as a technical audit issue. And we were at pains this year to demonstrate that not to be the case. And so we did something we haven't done before, which was to take 10 of the repeat disclaimers and do slightly different work on those. But the point I want to make on the slide before we move on it is that you can see disclaimers in a number of different provinces. The ones that are in the red on this slide are those that remain disclaimers from the previous year, so the repeat offenders, let's call them. The ones that are now in green means that they used to be disclaimers and now they've moved out of disclaimer. So if you take, for example, Umzinyati District Municipality in KZN, there used to be a disclaimer audit opinion, a repeat disclaimer. They used to even have consultants help them put financials together, and still they were a disclaimer. What we did last year was we issued material irregularity notifications to a number of these disclaimer municipalities. At Umzinyati, the new mayor and the new MM took it upon themselves to change behavior. They decided to start compiling financials properly, to start to put financial information and financial records together so that there is evidence for what it is they're putting in their financials. It's not that difficult. It needed a decision at the leadership level, and they responded to our MI by doing that. And as a consequence, they've been able to move out of disclaimer and are now have now been given a qualified audit opinion. Ours now is to continue to work with them until they get to the more desirable audit outcomes. Similar thing at Ingquza Hill, a leadership decision, and also backing by the provincial treasury and the provincial COCTA, who helped them to actually start putting their financial records in order. These municipalities that have moved into the better audit outcomes, in that they've moved out of disclaimer, highlight that once there is a leadership decision, a different tone at leadership level, moving out of a disclaimer is not that hard. And that indeed a disclaimer of audit opinion is a confirmation of the lack of discipline, a lack of commitment to accountability, to transparency, and to stewardship in terms of how those institutions are run. So at least our MIs in a number of instances are also having the impact of changing behavior and therefore changing audit outcomes. The specific things we did at 10 disclaimer municipalities, we selected them in the Free State, in Mpumalanga, in Northern Cape, and in the Northwest. We took these 10 and we looked through their bank accounts to see where is the money going, because they are not reporting on it properly in their financial statements. In 4 instances, we could see where it's gone. They've paid salaries, they've paid bulk purchases, they've paid statutory payments, and they've made payments to service providers. So now we know the areas of risk that need to be looked at, so we can direct the municipality and provincial leadership to look at the specific payments made to service providers and assess whether or not those payments are valid, whether or not those payments are consistent with goods and services duly received. But at least we have something we can say about those 4 out of the 10. The other 6, we simply have little to say. In fact, we have nothing to say. We've looked through their bank accounts, but because of the fact that they have no records, and even in their bank statements, they do not show whom they are paying, we are none the wiser in terms of where this money is going, which then demonstrates that a disclaimer of audit opinion must continue to be associated with poor stewardship of a public funds. We also used our powers in this instance to then refer these payments to the Financial Intelligence Center, because they have the mandate and the tools to follow up on where this money has gone. Once we have this insight on what these payments were for, we will then be able to assess our next course of action. The other piece of work we did with municipalities that were repeat disclaimers was to go look at their infrastructure. So we saw that their wastewater treatment plants are in a poor state of disrepair in the majority of instances. Same thing with their landfill sites. And of course, that causes harm to the public, it causes harm to the environment. And so we've issued material irregularities notifications to a number of these municipalities. One of those would be Mulem, where we've seen the evidence of dysfunction in terms of not just how the municipalities run, but also in terms of how infrastructure assets are being managed. And this now informs the responses that the new mayor and the municipal manager must now enforce. I'd like to then move on. I'm happy to come back to this with a bit more detail through the Q&A. I'm just sensitive to the notion that some of this information has been seen before. The next slide deals with the matters around financial reporting. You recall that I talked about how 141, being 41 clean audits and 100 unqualified audits, demonstrate that just over half of municipalities publish credible financial statements. In this slide, the bottom half, there are two graphs in the middle. So you'll see on the right-hand side, the 141 being the green, being just over half municipalities with published financial statements that are credible. When we started the audit process, only 62 had credible financial information. And the reason is because, and if you just go to the left of it, you'll see that the key controls and basic controls, these are not difficult things to do. Maintaining proper records, reconciling your records, and doing so on a regular basis, performing the key duty of compiling regular financial information, which can then inform the decisions that council must make, and making sure that there is adequate review of the work being done by junior staff. Those disciplines are not being enforced in far too many instances within our municipalities. So whilst we might want to celebrate that, well, at least more than half municipalities have credible financial statements, underneath that story is that 75% of municipalities have poor financial management practices in place. And this is despite the fact that they've got people employed to do the job, CFOs in their roles, CFOs who have staff reporting to them, collectively a payroll of 10.4 billion rand being paid to people on a full-time basis to compile financial statements, because running finances means that part of your output is the compilation of financial statements. And then at the end of the year, most of them go and appoint consultants to prepare financial statements. We tell you this year after year, this time around, the number is 1.26 billion rand that was spent by municipalities for the purpose of putting financial statements together. Some of it is for putting together VAT returns. And we've made the point that if you've got a CFO in place, why are you paying upwards of 30 million rand to someone to compile VAT returns for you? We've also made the point that if you've got a CFO in place, why are you hiring consultants for the purpose of reconciling your bank account or reconciling your fixed asset register? Yes, some of the technical accounting and financial reporting matters do require consultants, but we're finding in far too many instances, consultants have become a permanent feature in terms of how municipalities deal with financial reporting. They are not building the capacity that is needed in that institution. They are not putting in place the key controls that help them manage finances in a way that's prudent, but rather they are relying on a Band-Aid at the end of the year. Most of the provinces have got provincial treasuries and provincial cocters that do help, and they provide some support in terms of reviewing financials and reviewing audit action plans. But then again, that can never really have much of a sustainable impact if there isn't enough attention to building the institutions in local government. So we've raised this to say, well, you've got the role of the finance units, you've got the role of the consultants, you've got the role of the national and provincial government, and still the system is not responding. In fact, you've even got the role of the AG, where we are able to move the system from 62 credible reports, 25%, to 141 credible reports, being 57%. That difference is masking a very problematic story. And the question we keep asking is perhaps we also need to start changing how we do things. And we're raising this, yes, for ourselves to start asking, how can we best support the system to make different choices? Because this that we're doing doesn't look like it's working. It's adding on to audit fees, it's adding on to audit pressures, but worse still, it doesn't seem to be adding value into the system of governance. Perhaps if we change our posture and get everyone to reckon with the notion that only 25% of municipalities can actually compile their financials, maybe we'll start to get people making different choices. And we're also inviting others in the ecosystem to start interrogating the choices that they are making. The financial health of municipalities has continued to deteriorate over the past year, with most of the municipalities reporting some concerning statistics in terms of their own financial health. And on the next slide, you'll see that the worst affected provinces in terms of financial health of municipalities are the Free State, the Northwest, the Northern Cape, Gauteng, as well as Mpumalanga. And the key problem here is that, yes, there are economic pressures and fiscal pressures, but the reality is that municipalities are not managing the little that they might have properly. They're not billing properly, they don't budget properly. They basically approve unfunded budgets because they allow these budgets to show and account for own revenue, which they know they'll never collect. And when they don't collect it, they run out of cash, and then they start building up their arrears to Eskom, to the water board, and to other creditors. And much of this leads to what we've titled fruitless and wasteful expenditure, because they end up paying penalties and interest to creditors when they pay late, and because they're not managing their cash flows properly. We found that creditors at the year end exceeded cash on hand at 47% of municipalities. So 47% municipalities had creditors that had a higher value than the cash that they had on hand at the end of the year, meaning that they would need the following year's equitable share to pay for previous year's expenditure, the following year's conditional grants to even start dealing with their cash flow pressures from previous years. 26% ended the year in a deficit in that their income was less than the expenditure. One of the things that we worry about when we look at financial health is that far too many municipalities don't provide for maintenance of the infrastructure that they have. So very few of them spend the 8% norm on maintaining their municipal infrastructure, which then means the infrastructure that is in the ground starts to deteriorate over time. And then with the requisite impact, negative impact on the ability to deliver services and even generate revenue. We're also finding that in far too many instances, they don't provide for cash flow or capital that's going to help them replace infrastructure in time. So their balance sheets don't make any provision for new infrastructure. And that then diminishes the ability to respond to the growing needs of a population. So the state of financial health, the state of the income statements and balance sheets and cash flows of municipalities is in a very poor state. And that has a detrimental impact on current services being provided, but also it'll have a negative impact on future services if the situation is not corrected. Performance information, which is the next slide, we found that this area remains largely ignored. Municipalities will worry about financial submissions or financial statements, but then they don't really worry too much about performance information. And this instrument is quite important because it helps a municipality plan for delivery of services, delivery of projects, manage the execution of those services, and even evaluate performance at the end of the year and ultimately report faithfully to citizens at the end of the year. None of that has any strength in the system. And that has a devastating impact on the experience of citizens who really cannot trust the information that's given to them around what's being planned and what's ultimately being executed. And that's what increases the trust deficit between citizens and these institutions. One of the things that we've highlighted to most municipalities is that they've got to attend to making sure that their integrated development plans are properly structured and reflect the real service delivery requirements, and that those IDPs are distilled into the annual plans in a way that makes sense given the performance targets as well as the budgets being approved, and that the implementation of the annual plan is properly monitored. If they don't do that, they'll never really get to a point where they're able to account for service delivery. We've also highlighted that if they don't include critical things, they end up in a scenario such as the Nelson Mandela Bay, where their annual plan did not include any indicators for key projects that would have allowed them to respond to the drought and the water shortage. And that's one of the reasons, amongst many, they're unable to account for what they've done over several years in terms of dealing with the impending disaster on drought. We've highlighted in the report also that the IDP is done by the council, is approved by council, but it has the benefit of being reviewed by COCTA. The annual plan similarly has the benefit of being reviewed by COCTA. So the question we must keep asking is, how can we get COCTA's review to really add value into the system? How can we even get the provincial treasury's review of the budget to also add value into the system? Because if you don't have a budget that really talks to the performance plan, you really are not planning for delivery, and not certainly not in a way that makes sense, in a way that would be easy to account for. So we've called on all of the role players, those charged with specific municipalities, but also those at the provincial level and at the national level, to start thinking about how they can play their roles differently so that they do add value into the ecosystem. I'm now going to talk about the MIs, which is going to be my last input before I hand back to you, Katie. We are now in the third year of implementing our powers, and these powers, you recall, come as a result of the amendment to the Public Audit Act. That amendment was effective from the 1st of April 2019. The powers really allow us to enforce accountability by following up on the implementation of the recommendations we've made at the end of an audit. The powers also, I think it's important to highlight, are still founded on the key principle that underpins public financial management, which is that accounting officers remain responsible and accountable. The AG can't step in and run the institution. We've got to use our powers to propel the accounting officer into action. So part of the reason why you'll see us highlighting the process that's been stipulated in the law is to highlight that we've got to give accounting officers the space to implement their intended plans before we take action. So when we issue a material irregularity, which is really an audit finding, call it a non-compliance, or we found instances of a fraud or breach of fiduciary duty. So an audit finding which has the impact or is likely to have the impact of financial loss, of harm to a material public resource, harm to an institution, harm to the public. If we can find that link, then we issue a material irregularity. By the time we issue the MI, we would have issued an audit finding anyway, so the accounting officer is well aware of what's happening. But when we issue the MI, we then say to them, this audit finding is so serious that it warrants your immediate action. Tell us within the next 20 days what it is you're going to do with it. And then after that time they respond, we look at whether or not the planned approach by the accounting officer is adequate and appropriate. If we believe that to be the case, we then allow them space to implement that which they've set out. It's only if we are unsatisfied that they will do what's required, then we will refer the matter for investigations ourselves. When the investigation comes back, we'll still give them an opportunity to act on a recommendation. We'll say to them, now that we've investigated, we recommend that you do the following, which is now a firmer recommendation than what was in the audit. The accounting officer would then be given space to implement a particular course of action. It's only if they fail to do so, then we will step it up into a remedial action, binding remedial action. And that then gives them a specific period with very clear directives on what needs to be done. And then if they'd still failed to implement that remedial action, then we issue a certificate of debt in the name of the accounting officer that fails to act. So they would have had an audit finding, an MI notification, recommendation, a remedial action, and only then we issue a certificate of debt in their name. That certificate of debt will affect the individual accounting officer because their failure to act in accordance with their duties in terms of the Public Finance Management Act has resulted in a particular loss or harm to the public. Part of the reason why you'll see us also talk about how some of the accounting officers respond is that what we see is that accounting officers who tend to ignore our audit findings, when they see a matter being now given to them as an MI, we see that they do take notice and they do act on issues because they understand now that there's the prospect of something that's going to hit them in the pocket. It remains our view that we need to get accounting officers to not only act on one MI that we might refer to them, but they must deal with all of the audit findings in a systematic way so that they start to build strength in their institutions. We're now implementing at 94 municipalities. We've issued 185 MIs, and they cover the areas that we often raise through the audits. Weaknesses in procurement management and contract management, poor maintenance of infrastructure, poor project management, billings issues, cash flow management problems. In the instances where there's been no submission of financials, we've issued MIs. In the instances where there are repeat disclaimers, we've issued MIs. And also in the instances where we've seen this dilapidated infrastructure, we've issued MIs. Last year, what we found was that with the change of leadership in many municipalities, our ability to enforce these powers was delayed because we had to give the new leaders an opportunity to engage with the facts. So if you look at Nakamudiri Mulema, where we are already at binding remedial action, there was the new mayor asked that we give him an opportunity to work with the accounting officer to actually implement the things we had raised. So we must give them that opportunity to do so that by the time we issue a certificate of debt, we have not only followed the law and demonstrated fairness, but indeed we've actually given them ample opportunity to do what's required. The big win that we'll all make is ultimately for accounting officers to take responsibility for the things that they must and to act within the authority that they have to safeguard institutions. Some of the successes we've had, I've spoken about some of the disclaimers, such as Umzinyati. King Sabata Dalingebo, which is a municipality that's got a number of different problems. There we raised an MI relating to how they were paying ESCOM late and then incurring penalties and interest, which is fruitless and wasteful expenditure. What we found was that the CFO there started to act by going to negotiate with ESCOM on a repayment profile, and they're honoring it so far, by also putting in place key controls within that municipality to avoid late payments, by also putting in place in the performance contracts of different people within the municipality, different officials, the responsibility for them to manage costs down, to save costs, so that they can save cash and be able to meet their obligations for bulk purchases. We agree it's not the only problem that KSD has, but this level of responsiveness is what we would want to see. In the Eastern Cape, both metros, we were able to identify areas where they were not billing correctly and therefore losing revenue that is due to the metros. And in both instances, we've had accounting officers who responded, changed their systems, changed their billings, and are now able to generate the income that they should. It's not all of their problems, but it is demonstrating that where there is some responsiveness, things do change. In Tshwane, there are instances where we found that they were not safeguarding some of their assets, and as a result that they were being vandalized. What they did was they took action following our MI. They put in place the necessary security on their infrastructure, but also they worked with the police to get people arrested, the people who were guilty of vandalizing these infrastructures. So another indication of the impact that the MI journey can have when there is responsiveness. Where there is no responsiveness, we will not hesitate to issue a certificate of debt. Machabeng is a municipality that we referred a matter to the Hawks over a year ago. That remains a matter that's sitting with the Hawks. And I think, as I highlighted when I talked about the repeat disclaimers, we are finding all manner of opportunities to refer matters to institutions that are relevant in a particular instance. So if you look at those repeat disclaimers, those 6 municipalities where we could not trace whom they paid nor why, we are then able to refer that to the FIC, and that allows them to act on their mandate. Because I guess as the AGSA, we've accepted that we can't do everything, and neither should we. We are not responsible for law enforcement, and we shouldn't try to even pretend that that's the case. So we're not going to put people in jail, regardless of what the expectation is, but we will act on our powers and use our reach and influence to start changing the behavior that is undesirable so that we can start to change the culture within the public sector. Part of the reports that we've tabled last week incorporates the detailed report on the material irregularities that we've issued so far, where they are, what the substance is, and what the status is. But as I conclude, really, we've issued a call to action for all the accountability role players. We've said that every single person, every single role players must act in accordance with their mandate and do so effectively and consistently. But if you look at specific municipalities, we've said that the new leaders of municipalities must not leave the system worse off than what they found it. In fact, they must use their term in office to systematically rebuild municipalities as public institutions. And they are going to do that if they enable the administration by giving it stability and making sure that they hire people that will add value into the capacity and capability of that municipality. They'll also be able to rebuild the institution if they insist on credible financial and performance information that must be generated on a regular basis by the administration. And they must act on that information, because acting on it would include rewarding the right behavior by those in administration and sanctioning transgressions and poor performance by those in administration. Ultimately, the leadership of the municipality, specifically the political leadership, has to make sure that they lead by example, setting the right tone in terms of what's acceptable in that municipality, and insist that those in administration do the right thing and do so consistently. And where they don't, the leadership must take action and do so swiftly, so that we can start to rebuild a different culture in local government, one that's characterized by performance, by transparency and accountability, so that we can really start to rebuild the integrity of these public institutions. We've also made the point that communities and community organizations also have a role to play. Citizens have a role to play. It's crucial that active citizens take an active interest in how their municipalities are being run, and to hold those that run municipalities accountable. Because it is important that every citizen, yes, enjoys rights, but also has got particular responsibilities, and they ought to act on it, which is one of the reasons why we're delighted by this opportunity to talk to you today, because it gives us a chance to talk to the people that help us reach these citizens. So thank you very much, Katie. I'm handing back to you.
Thank you, AG. That was really fantastic, and lots of new information there, colleagues, that wasn't necessarily anything we've heard in the past week. AG, we are being flooded with questions. I'm so thrilled about that. I'm also very thrilled that we've got a really high attendance. Welcome to those who joined us shortly after we did our official welcome. I think let's take it question by question. We'll start with the first one by Jan Cronier. He's saying, could the AG please speak about what audit documents municipalities should make public? We have in the past struggled to obtain documents from some municipalities. Would the AG consider hosting audit reports for each municipality on the AG's website as a means to boost transparency? That's a great question there about transparency, AG.
No, thank you very much, Jan. Municipalities are meant to put on their website the annual report, which includes a copy of the audit report. And so when they don't do that, we ought to be concerned. Including an audit report in our website is something we can certainly consider because it is a published report. By the time that report is tabled in council, which is a requirement in law, it really does become a public document. So we would be fine to put on our website the audit reports of municipalities. Thanks, Jan.
I'm going to pop down quickly to Nomazima Nkosi's question from the Sowetan. A few questions, so I'll ask a few of them to say what powers does the AG have to act against useless municipalities? And then who has what responsibility to fix regressing municipalities?
Okay, so the powers we have are really, to first of all audit and report. But now with these new powers, we are able to issue a material irregularity, which if it is not acted upon, we can refer a matter for investigation, as what you've seen us do in the instance of Machabeng, we referred to the Hawks. In the instance of the 6 municipalities, we referred to the FIC. When those investigation reports come back, we're able to issue recommendations. But if they don't act on that, then we can issue binding remedial action, which can only be altered by going through a legal process by that particular accounting officer. And if they still ignore the binding remedial action, then we can issue a certificate of debt. We still believe that the urgency with which we've got to rebuild these institutions demands that all of us work much more collaboratively, which is why you've seen us take the route of proactively referring matters to other institutions. And you've also seen us take the route of saying every single part of the accountability ecosystem must be propelled into action because yes, the accounting officer being the MM is responsible. The mayor has got particular responsibilities to hold that MM accountable. If the mayor fails, the council must hold the mayor responsible. If they fail, the MEC of COCTA has got particular responsibilities. And if they fail, the legislature in the province has got particular responsibilities. When we've looked at the ecosystem, we've been able to say, if a municipality fails and fails consistently, we must look beyond it to assess where was provincial treasury when financial management capacity was not being built, because that's their duty in law. Where was the MEC of COCTA when annual financial statements were not being submitted on time, where poor submissions were the order of the day and consistently so, and where there's been no responsiveness to AGSA audit findings? The law specifically says that every MEC of COCTA must, within a short period following the AG report, compile for the legislature a report that sets out what every municipality is doing in response to AGSA findings. And then when we dug deeper to understand where this happens or why it doesn't, where it doesn't happen, we found that in too many instances, that part of the law is not being observed. Those reports either don't reach the legislature. When they do, they get there late, in that they're a year late, 2 years late. And sometimes they get to the legislature and they're not even acted upon. So we've got to get everybody to act within their power so that we can shift the system. The Section 71 reports that are submitted to the National Treasury have got particular nuggets of information around financial management, which really ought to equip the provincial leadership, being the Premier, COCTA, and the Provincial Treasury, to work together to start putting together interventions quickly because it's a quarterly thing, quickly. They really need not wait for the year end to start acting on these reports. So in a nutshell, the design of the accountability ecosystem, to our mind, makes sense. What we've got to do is propel everybody into action. Thanks.
Thank you. Nkosikona, I see your hand is up. Please, could you turn your camera on so you can ask the AG your question? And Nkosikona, we can't hear you. I think you're muted. No, there's an issue with your audio. I'll come back to you. Let me ask another question. So long. The other question, AG, comes from Jan Cronier again, saying the AG's report last week mentioned problems facing wastewater treatment plants in numerous municipalities. Would the AG say this problem is getting worse across the country? Could she say broadly how many of South Africa's municipalities face problems maintaining their wastewater plants and what can be done?
Thanks, Jan. So yes, the problem is getting worse. And think about it, if too many municipalities are unable to budget for maintaining infrastructure year on year, they don't even have maintenance plans to actually maintain the infrastructure. That infrastructure will deteriorate. And so when we've been cautioning against the neglect of infrastructure maintenance over many years, this has been the very thing we've been trying to deal with. And so in terms of how many of the wastewater treatment plants, I don't have the number. We didn't look at every single one. We just located our focus on those 10 that were problematic. But I am aware that the Department of Water and Sanitation has issued the Green Drop report, which is something that had been missing from the public discourse for a long time. But that report provides a worrying set of statistics about the nature of the wastewater treatment plants. I would refer you to that for detail in terms of where the problems are. But a short answer to your question, is it getting worse? Yes, it is. And it's because there's been ongoing neglect in terms of maintaining them, no plans, no budgets, no discipline in terms of maintaining them, but also there's been inadequate attention to building new ones as the population has grown. Thanks.
Thank you. And Nkosikona, can we try you again? Let's see if we've got any luck this time with your audio. No. Still no luck, unfortunately. Apologies, I'm going to move on. Next question, AG, is what is the AG's impression? Again, this question is from Nomazima from the Sowetan. What is the AG's impression of the performance of councils, accountability structures, MECs, ministers, and everyone in the accountability value chain? I'll ask you a second question as well, also from the same colleague. During the last term, South African municipalities were run by coalitions. How did these coalition-run municipalities perform?
Okay, let me start with the last one. The coalitions that I guess are most evident to most of us would be in the metros, and one can see the impact of the instability at council in terms of how those municipalities run. So we have some way to go as South Africans to getting these coalition arrangements to be stable and to provide effective oversight in terms of how municipalities run. The impression of the performance of councils. So part of raising the accountability ecosystem as an issue this time around is out of a recognition that not everybody is playing their part to the effect that they should. And then we want to go and implement band-aid solutions. And in the interim, what happens is that the institutions become weaker and weaker. So what we found is that where you've got provinces with a premier who sets a particular tone, coordination between the provincial treasury and the provincial COCTA, where you've got stability at council, things run a lot better than where the reverse is true. And I gave you the example of Limpopo in terms of the tone that was set there. If you look at Gauteng, if you look at the Western Cape, you do see the impact of a particular tone being set at the provincial level. And you do see the impact of particular support that is offered at the provincial level. And then, as I say, the opposite is it's true. If you look at the provinces with the worst outcomes, the Northwest and the Free State in particular, you'll see that the weakness arises within the municipality and the different councils there, but also in terms of the role that the provincial leadership ought to play.
Thank you. Let's move on. Our next question is, South Africa has sufficient laws and does not need more laws to fix the political mess. People just need to be dealt with legally or politically and either be jailed or fired. Is your view, AG, a different one? And if so, why? I don't know if this is something you want to weigh in on. That's your call. And then I'll ask the follow-up there from the same colleague. The AG seems to be doing a lot of work to try to legislate us out of this mess, but to what end? Because of the organizational culture of municipalities is hardly governed by law and public policies, but by ANC branch politics. Can we please get your views on that?
So what we're seeing is that you can't have the AGSA doing everything. That's not our role, and that's not what we should be doing. You've got to get everybody playing their part. And those that don't play their part must face sanction, whether legally or politically. And if you look at the makeup of how a municipality runs, you've got political leadership at the top with very clear powers and responsibilities. And then you've got the administrative leadership with, again, very clear authority and responsibilities. You've got to make sure that there's stability and clarity of purpose at council level, and there must be stability and proper capacity in the administration. If you don't do that, you're going to have problems and continued weakening of institutions. If the political leadership isn't stable, but worse still, doesn't provide space for the administration to do their work and hold them accountable, then the ecosystem doesn't work, right? And similarly, if you look across to the provincial level, as I've said, where the provincial leadership is effective in playing their part, you see the impact in the municipalities, and the reverse is true as well. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question here is, could you say how many certificates of debt have been issued to date? Have any been issued for the 2020-2021 year?
We haven't issued a certificate of debt yet. We are close to doing so on some of these instances. But what we are very cautious about is to make sure that we give ample opportunity for the people charged with those responsibilities to do their work. And if they fail, and if they consistently fail, we then follow the legally set out process, which has got to be transparent, but also administratively fair. That will get us to a certificate of debt. So the short answer is no, we have not yet issued a COD, and all of our MIs are in different stages of processing.
Next question here, for the Free State in particular, which municipalities have been issued with MIs, and are there any that have been facing binding remedial action?
So in the Free State, I'm just trying to pull out we've issued a number of MIs in different parts of the Free State. MIs either for these repeat disclaimers, MIs for wastewater treatment plants, such as Maluleke is one that I remember, MIs around non-submission of financial statements. So we've issued a number of different MIs in different parts of the Free State, and they are in different stages of being processed. In Machabeng, there's an MI that's been there for quite a while. That one was referred to the Hawks. There are also municipalities in the Free State that are part of the 6, where we've referred matters to the FIC. And then there are also a number of municipalities whose MIs are now in the stage of recommendation, which if they ignore that recommendation or don't act appropriately in accordance with what we expect, then we will issue binding remedial action, which will get us to a certificate of debt. And there, Maluleke, Masilonyana, Tukuluho, are the ones that come to mind, which are sitting in the binding remedial, in the recommendation stage. So they are in different stages. We have the report, maybe Harold, you can put the link on here. We have a detailed report that sets out all of the MIs across the country, so that if you have a particular interest on any municipality, you'll be able to see where the MIs are.
Okay, Nkosikana, we're going to try this one last time. Let's see.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I've changed my device. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, so I just have about 3 questions, but they're all related, Casey, so if you allow me. So thank you, Ms. Maluleke, for this presentation. This report states that on average, CFOs spend about 45 months in their positions. In your view, is this adequate time to build internal capacity in finance units within municipalities? What impact is this having on service delivery? And lastly, what reasons, if you are aware of them, that are making municipalities unable to retain CFOs for longer than 3 years and 9 months?
Thanks, Nkosikana. So that 45 months is on average, right? Is it adequate? It's certainly adequate to get the basics in place. You should be able to get proper records in place, etc. And it does help to have a longer time period so that you can build a strong team that can exist when that CFO is no longer in that particular role. What we found is that there's an interesting correlation between the tenure of a CFO and the audit outcomes, certainly around the ability to attain a clean audit and to maintain it. Where you've got a CFO plus the MM in place for 5 years, that's where you find the clean audits. So if you look, especially in the Western Cape, with the high number of clean audits that they have, many of their MMs and CFOs have been in those roles for a good 5 years. And the reverse is also true. Where you've got the disclaimers, that's where you've got huge instability in the role of the CFO. And the reason that you find that is that you need a CFO who's got the time, yes, the skills and competence, but also the time to build the key disciplines and to build a strong team around them and to put in place the systematic improvements that are necessary to build strong institutions. None of these things can be done quickly, and which is why we've cautioned against the over-reliance on consultants and on these band-aid type interventions, and to say we've got to build capability in institutions. And the way you do it is by having a strong administration, people with competence, people with ethics, and people that are going to stay the course of building a team around them and making sure that the right things happen more often than not. Thanks, Nkosikana.
Thank you. I see Franz also has his hand up. Francello.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm not sure if you are able to hear me.
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Francello Amachate from Pina News. My questions will be more on action-based. What is the role of the society or of the community in making sure that councils or public institutions do comply with the PFMA? And also, can this document be used in the court of law as an evidence document on irregularities within public institutions? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. I'm not sure I understood the question around, can this document be used in a court of law? Maybe you can clarify that. So I'm not sure I can respond to that. But what can people do? What can communities do to hold municipalities accountable? You know, one of the things that we've learned over time is just how critical it is for citizens to take an active interest in the process of the council putting together their IDP, the Integrated Development Plan, because you've got to make sure that the ward councillor that represents you is vigilant in ensuring that the service delivery needs of that community are actually taken into account. Because if that doesn't happen at the IDP level, it's never going to happen over the 5 years. And then there's the annual process of approving budgets and approving annual plans. And the question becomes, to what extent are citizens engaged in that journey of making sure that the things that are being planned to be done by the municipality on your behalf are consistent with your needs and expectations? And I'm not suggesting that every single citizen will get exactly what they want or feel they deserve every year, but there's got to be some attention to what's being planned, and is it consistent with the development needs of the people in that municipality? And then the last thing I would say is that when the annual report gets tabled and becomes part of public information, citizens ought to expect from their public representatives clarity around how they plan to deal with AG audit findings. The time for us to leave well enough alone and expect our elected representatives to do it all and kind of hope that that happens, I think that time is over. And the things I've listed here are not specific, like they're not very complex or technical things. It's really about saying, let me take an interest in what's sitting in this IGP. Let me take an interest in what's sitting on the annual plan. What is my municipality planning to do? Are they planning to maintain the roads where I live? Or are they planning to rather prioritize building new roads somewhere else in response to the growth of the city? Which is fine, but it's really about saying, let me know about it, so that when my road isn't built, I understand why, and hopefully it'll happen the following year. So that when we get to the end of the year, we are looking carefully to see that the road that was meant to be built is actually built. And the responsiveness to AG audit findings, the responsiveness to the need to build these institutions is something we should take an active interest in. None of these things are going to happen overnight. It's really going to be about all of us playing our role and doing so consistently, so that we can systematically start to change the way that municipalities are run.
Thank you, AG. I've got a question here from Lolita from Health E-News Service, and the question is, please describe the impact on health services and access to health services for people living in the municipalities that are least diligent on infrastructure and poor financial management. And then which of the findings in the report would you say directly impact the health of people living in the municipalities?
Thanks for that question. I think it's a big question. I hope I'll do justice to it. If you look at the report, we often would have said maintenance of infrastructure is not happening because it's not being budgeted for, and where it is being budgeted for, the quality of spend is inappropriate, in that we're not getting the best bang for the money that is there. And we would have stopped there and had that sort of theoretical, technical view on it. This time around, we've said, let's look at the impact of the continued neglect of maintaining infrastructure. So if you look at the story of the 10 repeat disclaimers and the story around the state of their infrastructure, 7 out of the 10 infrastructure projects we visited were characterized by dysfunction and disrepair, which then tells you that that has a direct impact on the conditions of people who live in that municipality. If you've got wastewater treatment plant that's not being maintained, you've got effluent running down the road, you've got sewage running into your rivers, it has a detrimental impact on people living there. If you've got poor spend on infrastructure, again, if you've got no plan to maintain municipal roads, you then have the direct impact of the roads deteriorating, the conditions of the roads deteriorating, and therefore the ability of people to access any services becomes diminished. So I would say that the part where we deal with performance information should get some attention. The part where we deal with these repeat disclaimers, and yes, it's only 10, but it gives you a good feel of how to link our audit messages to what happens in terms of reality on the ground. I would love to hear from Lolita again once you've had a look at this, and perhaps you can advise us on how to equip you with greater insights going forward. But for now, I would say please have a look at the area that deals with performance information.
Thank you. AG, next question here is, when you presented these latest audit outcomes to Cabinet, what was the response And was it different from previous responses? If you were the president and having seen the dire state of local government, what would you do?
I thought that the response we got was indeed different from what we've had before. I think that the message we were able to share, and especially because we moved away from just the technical messages on things, but rather to link it to direct practical things and to show the leaders of our government the link between what happens at a municipality and what happens at national level and what happens in between. And to highlight to them the different roles that they ought to play. I do believe that we got a different response than what we've had before. If I were the president, I would have done exactly what he's done, which is to insist that we spend a bit more time working through systematic responses to each of the things that the AG has raised, so that it's not just worrying about one report 1 year in one meeting, but rather to say, how can we fix the system? So my sense is that there's no one that we've spoken to that isn't inspired to act differently. And for us, that's quite exciting and encouraging, because it gives us yet another opportunity to change the choices that people make.
Do you want to tackle that last one? If you were the president, what would you do? The last part of that question.
I think I would do exactly what he's done, which is to say, let's take some time and actually deal with this thing properly. Let's not gloss over it and accept the report and almost join the chorus of lamentations. Let's rather actually sit back and say, what must each of us do differently? So yeah, that's what I would do. And I would make sure that I shift the conversation from saying municipalities are challenged, okay, but rather to say all of us are in this whole story together. What must we each do differently? And how are we going to hold each other accountable for these different choices so that we can get systematic shifts in the lot of local government?
Thank you, AG. The question here from Victoria O'Regan from Daily Maverick. Can the AG please indicate or state which 41 municipalities received clean audits?
Okay, thank you for that. The report, I think, has a detailed list of all of them, but I'll tell you that 22 of them are in the Western Cape. The rest are dotted in different parts of the country. I mentioned City of Ekurhuleni, Midvaal. There's a district municipality in Limpopo. There are 4 in the Eastern Cape. So I think just to highlight, most are in the Western Cape, and then a number of them are dotted in different parts of the country. The district municipalities of the Northern Cape have a clean audit outcome, as well as one of their local municipalities, Hantam. But I think, Harold, if you could just put on the link, maybe another, on the chat, a link to the report which states the detail of each of the 41.
Okay, great, thank you. Nkosikaana's got a follow-up question to say, is the AG aware of the reason why, on average, CFOs are staying in their positions for no longer than 3 years and 9 months?
Sure, that's a tough question. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure. What I will say, though, around how professionals tend to operate, you'll find that where there is stability in council and in the administration, where there is role clarity in that the council and the mayor are very clear on their duties in law, and on the other hand, the administration is very clear on its duties and authority and accountability. That creates for an environment that is poised for professionalism and for delivery. And it becomes more and more attractive to professionals. Whereas if you don't have any of those things, you end up with institutions that are unable to attract talent, and we're still unable to retain talent. So if you look at a municipality like Mogalakwena, I always use this example, Year in, year out, the council is dysfunctional. And this is documented. I don't think I'm saying anything new. And as a result, the administration is quite unstable. Half the time, the CFO role is vacant. You'll find different people playing CFO at different times of the year. And then at the end of the year, they hire consultants, pay a fortune for compiling financials, and still get a poor audit outcome. That must be a difficult environment for any CFO to stay in. Whereas, when you've got greater stability, I always take some interest in what the leaders of municipalities tell us. I listen carefully to the mayor of Senu, municipality in the Eastern Cape, as well as the MM there. They talk about stability at council and in the administration. They talk about role clarity between the two of them. And they talk about how they're able to hold each other accountable in terms of delivery. And that has stood that municipality well in good stead, because they're able to deliver year on year good audit outcomes, demonstrate service delivery to their citizens, and demonstrate institutional strength that helps them navigate the challenges that arise for any institution. Thanks.
Thank you. AG, we've come to the end of our questions. Thank you for being so open. Thank you for your transparency in all of this. I believe it's been very insightful. I hope that our colleagues have felt that as well. Colleagues, thank you for joining us for the SANEF engagement as well. On behalf of SANEF, thank you. AG, it's been a pleasure. It has been a very difficult report to read. We're hoping that with time, it gets easier to read, and that many of the difficulties you outline and some of the catastrophic, actually, circumstances that you detail and outline are changed over time, and in a very short span of time, because I think enough time has lapsed already. But we thank you very much for your time and for your team for making this available. On behalf of SANEF, we wish you all well. Colleagues, this has been recorded. If anybody does wish for a recording, please do contact us. At the same time, I see that Harold has put a lot of links on the chat box. Please also feel free to contact Harold directly. He's also given us his cell phone number there, 082 847 9799, for those of you wanting to contact him directly.
Thank you very much for the engagement. Thank you, Katie, and to everyone on the platform. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Harold.
Bye.
Cheers.